going to do tonight is to take a little bit of a look at what Portsmouth looked like 100 years ago. I got you here a little bit under false pretenses because it's not exactly 100 years ago that I'm going to be talking about, but essentially that period that I'm going to talk about, as you'll see on the first slide that we have here. What happened was I have a lot of tax books and school report books, but I don't have one from 1913, so I picked one close by. This is mostly 1908. When the population of the town was 2,687, I would say it's about 17,800 right now, more or less. The total income for the town on the budget was $27,000 plus. The expenditures were the same, they balanced the budget. The appropriation for the schools was $6,000, and the amount from assessed taxation was $16,775. As far as the schools were concerned, the budget for the schools was $6,000. They got $1,080 from the state for day schools, and $440 from the state for high schools. Teacher salaries for the entire town, and we had all one-room schoolhouses in those days. I have pictures of those, but not in the show tonight. The teacher salaries, total teacher salaries were $5,301 for the year, total. And $1,400 plus for high school tuition. And high school, for the most part, was Rogers, but some of it was Durfee. The leading taxpayers in the town, as you might imagine, were the so-called Gentleman Farm people, the Vanderbilts and the Taylors especially. Glen Farm had 240 acres under Alfred Wynne Vanderbilt's ownership, and their tax bill was $2,160. Glen Farm, under the Taylor family, had 176 acres, and their tax bill was $1,591. And Sandy Point Farm, under Alfred Wynne's brother Reginald, had 176 acres and a tax bill of $1,053. The average tax bill in the town was roughly $6 to $10. Interesting numbers. I know, you have to add inflation. Anyway, the school budget was $7,429. Teacher salaries were almost $4,000. High school tuition, this is in 1908. High school tuition, $1,802. Superintendent's salary was $100, and they overspent. They overdrew $105.26. They didn't balance that budget. Such inefficiency. Okay. Now, almost everything else that I'm going to do is show you pictures. I hope you can see okay on the screen. We had to keep some lights on because of the TV. But I think it's clear enough that you can see everything. First of all, we have my hero in Portsmouth is a man by the name of O.E. Dubois. Do we have any Dubois people here tonight? We don't. There are members of the family still living in the north end of town. O.E. Dubois was a photographer from Fall River. And what he did was to become somewhat of an itinerant photographer. He roamed the whole Secundit area, from Westport to Little Compton to Tiverton to Portsmouth. I have a few of his photographs from Middletown, and there are about 8 or 10 from Jamestown. Interestingly, none from Newport. I've never seen one from Newport. He numbered his cards, but he didn't number all of them. I don't know how many there are, but I and a few other people put together a database of his postcards. And I did a book on him in 1983. And that year, I said, I have 65 of his postcards. That's enough. I can make a book out of that. So right now, I have 570 of his postcards. Wow. And I don't anywhere near have them all. Lots more. We put together, several of us put together, including the Little Compton Historical Society, a list by number and by those that weren't numbered. And it's a fairly thick notebook. And I did find one card in Little Compton. Sometimes I read the backs. I don't always. But sometimes I read the backs. And this one in Little Compton said that this photographer came by last week and took a picture of us in front of our house. And then he came back this week and wanted to sell copies of it to us. That's what he was doing. And I actually have a few photographs of him. This is one that his daughter gave me, one of these little girls here in the foreground. She was about 85 at the time in the 1980s. But she gave me this picture of him. And I have some of his postcards. His picture is on, I don't know how he did that. But anyway, he just covered everything A lot of his postcards are houses, and some of them are street scenes, and you're going to see a lot of them tonight. You'll see a lot of cards that have a typed name on the bottom, and often a number, and you'll be able to recognize those as his postcards. He was an excellent photographer, by the way. The composition on some of these postcards was really good. And by the way, I guess I've been talking about him too much because I looked at eBay this afternoon and found that there are 6 postcards by O.E. Dubois on the Portsmouth page. And the average price on them, or the price on them, it ranges from $30 to $50. Ridiculous. I mean, I got a few of these for $1.50.
Well, that is.
But I mean, that's just, I just hope that that particular purveyor doesn't sell his postcards. Anyway, they aren't really worth that much money. Only to people like me, I guess. Unfortunately for me, there were 7 cars listed, and I have 6 on it. So, we'll let that pass. Okay, we're going to do a tour. We're going to do a tour that's going to start at St. Mary's. It's going to come up the East Main Road, go through Island Park and the coal mine, and then go down the West Main Road and conclude at Prescott Farm. This is the route we're going to go. This photograph of St. Mary's could have been taken this afternoon. It hasn't really changed very much. The church actually was built, it opened in 1847. Its benefactor was Sarah Gibbs, and Sarah Gibbs's grave is right in front, right by those 2 trees on the right-hand side. But that, again, that's the initial one, and there hasn't really been much change since that. Next, we come to the entrance to Sandy Point Farm, Retinyl Vanderbilt's farm. He purchased this farm in 1902, and he lived there and kept it as a horse farm, although they had sheep and dogs and other animals that they raised. These gates are still there. Someone has decided to build a house behind them. My experience in that particular area is it's a little swampy because the houses next to it, down Wapping Road, are all up on high banks. I hope they're going to do that with this property too, and I hope they aren't going to do anything to change these gates. You can see on the right-hand side here, I should have my pointer. On the right-hand side, you see on the right, you can't see it as well there, right down on my computer, but it says Sandy Point Farm right under the light on the right-hand side, and you can still make that out on the gates today. Anyway, Sandy Point Farm was a going farm, and again, a horse farm, and Retinyl Vanderbilt was very much in the horse business all over the country. His horses were shown. I found examples that his horses were shown as far away as Kansas City, and in Madison Square Garden a lot, individual horses. And there's one photograph that I have of a horse posed right in front of these gates. It's really an impressive one. That's another lecture, by the way. I'm going to be doing a lecture on the gentleman farms later on. You'll have to come back for that. See more of that. Here we have East Main Road. East Main Road, just north of Sandy Point Avenue. Okay? This is an older picture, older than 1913. The reason I say that is because there are no trolley tracks on the right-hand side. The trolleys came along the East Main Road. They were built along the East Main Road beginning in 1898. And so this is before that.
Before 1898?
That's
before 1898?
Yes. And not too much traffic that day. But if you look at this, and again, I study these photographs a lot and really get a lot out of them. If you look on the left-hand side up near the top, you have the entrance to Oakland Farm, which is right there. You can sort of see how the grass has been cut on that part.
Get that extra postcard out of here.
Oh, here it is. I'm sorry, I might point. But right up in this area up here is where the entrance to Oakland was. And of course, across the way would be the entrance to the sports complex today. Alfred Glen Vanderbilt had Oakland Farm. He inherited it from his father in 1899 and spent a lot of money, particularly in 1904, to renovate it and bring in Olmsted and plant a lot of trees. And of course, that's one of the nicest tree lines that we have in the town along there, although some of those trees are getting pretty beat up lately. He was also a horseman, but his interest in horses was coaches and fours. And this is his stable. His stable could hold 90 horses. They were all architectural gems as well, as you can see from this photograph. And also he had a riding ring. It was called a hippodrome. And at the time it was built, around 1904, 1905, it was the largest private riding ring in the United States and close to the largest in the world. It was gigantic. I have the dimensions on it. Again, you'll hear about that later on. Unfortunately, Alfred Vanderbilt went to England for a horse show in 1915, and he sailed on the Lusitania.
Oh boy,
and when he sailed on the Lusitania, it was torpedoed and sank off the Irish coast.
Yeah.
And there actually, I came across his deposition in his will, which said that he had handed his life jacket to a woman, and he couldn't swim. And so he died on the Lusitania. It was 1915.
He says it was shot like a gem.
The farm itself, Oakland Farm, was then transferred to his son, William Vanderbilt, who was quite young at that point. He was only 14 years old. And he lived until 1981. But he only stayed in Portsmouth until about 1945-46, after World War II. He was the governor of Rhode Island in 1938-39. And again, an important person in the local history. He sold the farm to Robert and Anita O'Keefe Young in 1946. And most of it had fallen into disrepair by that time, and a lot of it was torn down in 1946 to 47. But beautiful buildings. I have pictures of the other barns too. They're spectacular. This one you may have seen in the newspaper a couple weeks ago. This is a trolley on the East Main Road, just about in front of the 70 Sports Complex, heading north. For some reason, the photographer, this is Dubois, was able to get the conductor or the motorman to stand out in front of the trolley. The trolley tracks were usually clear. They had machinery that cleared the trolleys. The roads were a little slower to come by, as you can see in comparison right here. Anyway, and I'll talk more about trolleys later on, and I'll talk more about trolleys in my next presentation, which is on transportation. But we had trolleys on the East Main Road from 1898 until 1925. Trolleys went out of business, replaced by buses. This is the Durfee Tea House that was on the, as you go down Glen Road, it was on the right. And when the Taylors took over Glen Farm, beginning in 1882, the H.A.C. Taylor, who was the person who established Glen Farm for the most part, although he didn't build the house wasn't built until 1923, completed until 1923. But Taylor decided he didn't want extra buildings on his property. So what he did was to move the Durfee Tea House across the street. It's still there. It's on Glen Road, and I think the barn is still there too. It was moved as well. And the Durfee Tea House was a place where people who went for a ride in the Glen and in their horses and buggies way back in the old days would stop there and have tea. That was the function of it. Again, it was moved probably about 1904, 1905, somewhere in that range. I have the date somewhere, but I couldn't find it. So. Whoops, wrong way. We had county fairs in Portsmouth, Newport County fairs, and they were around from 1898 until 1932. We had a very active agricultural association here, and the fairgrounds were across the street from where St. Barnabas Church is, up on the hill there, and one of the buildings at least, the big building is still there. And they had county fairs where in a lot of cases these gentlemen farms competed fiercely or who could have the best carrot and who could have this best thing and so on, and they really were in competition. This is a showing of horses, dray horses actually, pulling wagons that were being judged at the county fair. County fair was a big thing. The the auction, or the auction house that's there now was really part of the Grange Hall at that time. And the fair was right next to that. I love this one. This is really interesting. Quaker Hill. This is right outside, looking down the hill. And what amazed me when we really blew this up so we could show it was there's actually a horse and buggy right here coming up the hill, the only transporting the thing on the whole road. Again, you can sort of recognize this a little bit, and you can't quite see it, it's washed out a little bit, but over on the right, the trolley was on that right-hand side, right across the street here. Okay, that bank that's there, which, you know, extended bank, extended side of the road, was where the trolley tracks ran down the hill there. And again, in a closer up view, you can see the trolley tracks right in here. But it's an interesting view, and some of the buildings are still there. I don't know what happened to the horse and buggy, though. For going further down the East Main Road, we stand in front of St. Paul's Church and look north. Okay? You can see what was Jan Armour's photography studio over here, which was also the Masonic Hall before that. You have the Methodist Church here. You have a wagon out here, which is in front of Chase & Company, which was a meat market. And you have the intersection of the roads right here in front of the church. The white marks on the telephone poles were indications of trolley stops. However, the trolley people were so anxious to get fares, they would stop anywhere. But the fare for the trolley was 5 cents a town, by the way. So, and you could get a trolley in Newport, and with a few changes, find your way into Nashua, New Hampshire. It was a 4-hour ride, but you could do that. But the trolleys went to Fall River, to Taunton, and on up to Boston. Okay, so one other thing about this particular area, and this is a term that's name has faded somewhat. We used to call this Cozy Corner. Yeah. That whole area from sort of Clements up to here was called Cozy Corner for some reason. I think you all know what that building is, the library, with a couple of additions that have been put on. The library itself, not enough, I guess, because they kept some additions on. The library was dedicated in December of 1898. The period I'm most interested in around here is 1890 and 1930. So many things were happening. It really was a time of great progress in the town. This started with a group of people getting together and deciding that they were going to, wanted to form somewhat of a library association. And so they did, and because it was a new building, they decided, before they built this building, they decided they would ask the town clerk if they could house their books in the town clerk's office, and they did. But when they built the library, it's kind of interesting. In the early times, probably about 1913 or so, you could go to the library when it was open, which was Tuesday afternoon, and Saturday afternoon, and Saturday evening. That's all. One of the big benefactors of the Portsmouth Library was a man by the name of John Borden. And John Borden helped get the land for the library. He lived in that big white house further down, current John Borden's house, which is an apartment building today.
The one who supported the Newport Hospital back in that time period?
Yeah, he was a great benefactor. Yeah. I've seen his will. It was about 80, 90 pages.
One of my ancestors married Meredith. One of my great-great-grandfather's sisters married him.
He died in 1933, but he was a great benefactor to the library and to the town as well. Then if you, again, back up just a little bit, you see this view, and this is on the East Main Road. This is part of what later was Getzinger's, okay? And the other houses, I have another picture that has a little bit more of the other house on the corner in it. The house next to it, this one here, which was Niska's rug store and all that stuff, that was David Anthony's barber shop and pool hall. And it was that at this time. That's what it was at this time. Neat little building. Unfortunately, it's pretty far gone now. It was really a neat shop. And you can see the houses along the road further up. And again, those houses, that row of about 3 small white houses there are still there. Again, you got the trolley tracks going along the side of the road here. This trolley went from Newport and went out the East Main Road, eventually turned down Park Avenue, went across the Stone Bridge and to Tiverton, and then you could change at Tiverton and go on up to Fall River. This was the Old Colony Street Railway. This is the corner, the intersection of Dexter Street and the East Main Road, with Dexter Street going up there. This is a building that's still there. Carol Zinno ran it as a gift shop, 1750 house. It probably is about that old. At this time, though, it was a tinsmith shop. It's a daycare place now. But that's, again, right on that corner. Again, Dexter Street would go right up this road. I can't remember. I think these posts might still be there, next to Getzinger's. Now we look back the other way towards St. Paul's, and we see the famous streetscape of Portsmouth, which again, if you took this picture today, if you dared with all the traffic, the only thing that would be different is the road wasn't paved then. But all these buildings are still there. Antique shops and stuff like that along there. And again, you see the wagon in front of Chase & Company up here, which was there until, that was there until the late 60s, early 70s, I think. Now down off Water Street, we had Brownells Wharf. And Brownells Wharf was an important part of the commerce of the town because, as you may know, the town was an agricultural town and remained an agricultural town almost completely until World War II. The population of Portsmouth going into World War II was a little over 4,000. And after World War II, it grew quite dramatically. But farmland was a big thing. Well, what Brownells Wharf was for was to load produce on ships, on steamers that had previously started probably from Secana Point, carrying potatoes and fish and so on. They stopped here, picked up more stuff, then stopped at Bristol Ferry, and then went on to Providence. Again, the whole Secana line is another topic for another day, maybe like May 21st, that's what I'm talking about. Also, you have Gould Island over here, sometimes called Rattlesnake Island, and it's a preserve now, and it's a disaster now. It's been invaded by various problems with the trees and everything. It's pretty much barren. But Brownells Wharf was important. It also was used to bring in the rails and the poles for the trolley when the trolley line was built. Again, on the East Main Road, 1898, when that started. Not far up the hill from this, and again, another view, was the additional, what do I want to say, a supplementary, subordinate power plant for the trolley line. The main power came from down in Newport, but this was a subordinate one that they used if they had to, if they didn't have enough power. And bringing the trolleys along here also ultimately led, about 1911, for the beginning of electrification and bringing electricity into people's houses. The poles were there, the trolley line put the poles there, and then they decided to electrify the town during that time. And I have access to a set of diaries that were written by a woman by the name of Abby Sherman. For those of you who have been around a while, she was Arthur Sherman's mother. And she kept these diaries from Arthur Sherman, was the town clerk until he was about 94, I think. She kept these diaries from 1899 to 1933. And there's just some fascinating comments in there, especially when women got the right to vote. And she was very active in the Women's Christian Temperance Union and so on. She was really an interesting character. And she talked a lot about, and she mentioned they lived right up the top of the hill, up where the subway. That's where their house was. The barn was across the street. I can remember seeing the barn when I first came here. But the house, she said, we sat on the porch today and we counted, it was on a Sunday afternoon, we sat on the porch today and counted, 30 cars go by during the afternoon. In those days, this is about this time, 1913, in those days the speed limit on town roads was 10 miles an hour. And one of the other things that was kind of interesting about the roads was that a lot of houses were moved at that time. And if you moved a house and you had to leave it in the middle of the road overnight, you had to put lanterns on it. On East Main Road. Anyway, times have changed a little. Going a little further north on the East Main Road, this is the intersection of Sprague Street and the East Main Road. Sprague Street going off this way. And again, you have these houses down here. There are 3 houses there that were built for the workers on the trolley line. They're still there. They're all exactly the same. They were kind of like boarding houses for the workers on the trolley line. And the trolley is going along. We would hope it's going the other way, but I don't know. This horse might get a little scared if the trolley gets too close to him. But again, that's the level of traffic on the East Main Road in 1910, 1930. I forgot to mention, Dubois postcards, at least from the dates of cancellation on almost all fall in the period 1908 to 1913. That's when most of his work apparently was done. But anyway, that's kind of a neat one. The guy looks so casual just riding his horse and buggy. Trolley bearing down on him. Now this is an interesting one. This would be taken, this is on East Main Road. This would be taken from just about in front of the Verizon building, that red brick building there on East Main Road, right before you get to Sprague Street. Looking up to Fort Butts. You can't quite make the same picture today. It's all so overgrown. Fort Butts was a Revolutionary War fort built by the British at the time of the Battle of Rhode Island, back in the siege of Newport, the Battle of Rhode Island, back in 1778. And it's still there. It's sort of surrounded by brush. It's been pretty well beaten up. It's a great place for the high school kids to hang out. And you obviously cannot see it, but these ramparts are still there. You can still see them when you go up there. And one of the things about this, I'm going to talk about coal mines in a minute, but on this hill that it was on was a great amount of coal. Underneath was a great deal of coal. And if you go up to Fort Butts, and I would encourage you to do it just to see that it's there, if you look down at the ground and you see all kind of graphite and coal on the ground. So in some cases there's no grass, but it's just all it's right next to the windmill, right above the windmill. So, but Fort Butts was quite visible at this time. I think this building on the left is probably part of that antique store, gift shop rather, that's there now. But on that side. I think so. I haven't gone back. I looked at it as I drove by, which takes your life in your hands when you do that, but I looked up and there's just no way you could repeat this view today.
Yeah.
Now here we have a view of Portsmouth from Fort Barton in Tiverton. Fort Barton, if you don't know, is just above the Tiverton Town Hall. And there's a tower there that you can go up, and that's probably where this picture was taken from. This is also around the period of 1913 because the stone bridge is under reconstruction. The stone bridge was always under reconstruction. The first one that was built there was in a wooden bridge in 1795. And if you've ever gone through there in a sailboat, you know there's a wicked current through there. And it always was washing out the underpinnings of the bridge. There was a hurricane and the great gale of 1815 that took it out again. There were other storms during the 19th century, one in the 1860s, and then there was a really big storm around 1908, which took the stone bridge out again, and it had to be rebuilt. And when it was rebuilt, it lasted 4 years, and in 1912 they had to build it again. I think this is during the 1912 reconstruction. You can't see this very well on the screen, but I've studied this picture a lot. There are 2 little ferry boats right here. And those were used to bring people across while the bridge was under repair. I I have other pictures of those which show them a little bit more close up. But there were 2 ferries used at that point to do that. Now what you also can see is that this part of Island Park wasn't very busy. We had no escape bridge, okay? And more than that, look at Valhalla, okay, over here. You can see the tree line along what's called Chase Road. It's really an extension of the East Main Road. But that tree line is right here. And then where Valhalla is just all farmland. That was Henry C. Anthony's farm, part of Henry C. Anthony's farm. And he was a major seed grower who had not only land in Portsmouth, but he had land in Canada, he had land in Brazil, I think, and all over the place. He was a big-time operator in the agricultural business. And a state senator from Portsmouth, among other things. But this is O'Neill's Point up here. There was a house there that was quite distinctive. Not too many marinas in those days, however. This is Island Park. Okay. The Island Park amusement park was built as a trolley park. Trolley parks are very common in the days when the trolleys were functioning. I grew up in western Pennsylvania, and we had one next to our town, between our town and the next town, and it was right on the trolley line. And the trolley companies built them. This one evolved over a number of years. You'll see a closer picture, but this was the merry-go-round here, which was the first building of this park. But other things that are here, and again, I'm going to give you another lecture on Island Park in a few months. The dance hall was over here. The various games and so on were in here. Obviously the roller coaster, you'll see another picture of that in a minute, was there, called the Bullet. One of the things that's interesting, and I actually have a picture of this, I can't believe they did this, but see this little pond right here? And then there's a tower above it. That's where the diving horse dives. I have a picture of a horse halfway down. I don't know how they got up there. But anyway, that's the pond they fell in, right there. And of course the roller coaster went all the way out here. It was really a big deal. It was really nice. And of course you had the beach right here too. I'll show you other pictures of the beach. But again, and this building, where is it here now? Oh, it's better online. Yeah, this building right here was the Knights of Columbus Hall for a long time after this. I'm not sure what it is now. It's still there. But anyway, that's and at Island Park. At Island Park, they had all kinds of activities that went on. They had all these things that were happening. In the dance hall, they had what were called Australian heel and toe derbies, which were dance marathons. They also had a great deal of state police interest in Island Park because in the back rooms of a lot of buildings, they had slot machines and things like that. At the time, they were all pretty active with that. But anyway, so there was a lot of, and that park was there, the beginning of it was 1898, and obviously and they had a number of fires in the 1920s, and eventually it all got destroyed by the 1938 hurricane. And about 18 people died in Island Park in the 38 hurricane. Just a wall of water came up from this Secundus River, 12-foot wall of water, and took it all out. This is one of the prettiest postcards that I have. It shows the merry-go-round here and the Trolley Station right there. This was a Loof merry-go-round, which is you know, the peon of merry-go-round. It really was the best ones made. They had one at Newport too, and one at Newport got wiped out in the 38 hurricane too, and all of a sudden all the horses disappeared. Nobody knew what happened. They found a few in people's basements later. This is the Bullet. This was the roller coaster that they had there. Again, it's a pretty big operation. Does anybody not know where this was, by the way? Just show me a hand if you're not sure. Okay, it was down in Island Park. As you go down Park Avenue on the right-hand side. Okay, where's Bob? What's the name of the restaurant now? 501?
Graziano's.
Yeah, right where the flea market used to be, right in that area on the right-hand side of Park Avenue. That's where it was. And here are people bathing at the beach. Okay. Great bathing suits. But this shows, you can see a little bit of the, I think that's part of the roller coaster there, and then the dance hall, short dinner hall is there. And they even tangoed on the beach. Tango on the sand. Anyway, that's the label on the postcard, nothing I added.
They enjoyed themselves, that's great.
Okay, going a little further. Again, this is, I hope everybody realizes this is more or less in order, okay, and that you would take this trip today. Here we have the stone bridge. And the stone bridge, they were testing the weight of it to make sure the trolley could go across safely. I don't know what would happen if it didn't. But you've got all the rather rotund inspectors and everything standing over here and over here, watching the trolley go across. This is the 1912 bridge. It was what was called a double lift roller bridge, and they actually would raise it. It opened up like this, and they would raise it even when a sailboat was going through. And there was a man who tended the machinery there and so on. In fact, this one right here looks about the size of, right here, looks about the size of the bridge tender. Anyway, so that's a test of the new bridge. I guess it worked. This is another classic postcard by Dubois. Again, all of these are pretty much his. Didn't spell bridge right, but that's okay. We'll forgive it. It's really an excellent photograph that shows you the Stonebridge Inn over here. Okay, and you can see the bridge. It was a pretty impressive bridge. It was pretty big, with the carts exchanging and so on. The 15-point road is right over here off the bridge. And I guess one of the last hurricanes, I don't know if it was Irene or Sandy, really beat up the Tiverton side of this, and they're about to spend a whole lot of money, or somebody is, to rebuild that part of the bridge. Not that the bridge is ever coming back. The bridge was finally closed down in 1954 when the Secana River Bridge, that beautiful structure of the Secana River Bridge was built. It was being built at the time of the hurricane, and they finished it up pretty quickly and transferred everything up there. I'm not sure the stone bridge ever opened again.
No, they did.
After the hurricane. Going around the corner, we come to Bristol Ferry. And here we have the ruins, if you will, of the Bristol Ferry landing. This is the wharf that's still there. This was an important stopping off point. What we have to understand is that there was a tremendous transportation hub at Bristol Ferry. We had the steamboats that stopped at this wharf, steamboats that went from Fall River to Providence, steamboats that went from Providence to Secana Point, again, hauling a lot of produce. And a lot of farmers in Portsmouth took their produce to Bristol Ferry in order to load it on the boats. Also, from 1864 on, the railroad went through there. The railroad was built beginning in 1862 during the Civil War and was completed in 1864. And of course, there was a railroad bridge that went across the Secana River that we all probably remember. It's not there anymore. But, and so the railroads were used for hauling farm produce as well. The big problem always with the railroads, I'm getting into my next lecture, was that there was no direct route from Portsmouth to Providence. You had to go, to Fall River and then go across on the Providence, Warren, Bristol line. But the bike path in Bristol and Warren, was a trolley line, a steam, well, not really a trolley line, it was a steam-powered line that went that way. And so what you would do is that you would take, if you were going from Newport, Portsmouth to Providence, you would take the trolley to the trolley wharf, because there was a trolley wharf north of Bristol Ferry Wharf. The remains of that trolley wharf are still there. If you're ever up that way, you get almost under the Montvaux Bridge, and you look down and you'll see pilings sticking up from the trolley wharf that was there. And so you could take the trolley, then you take the ferry across, and of course the ferry was owned by the trolley company. In particular, William H. Vanderbilt, who was was involved in all of that, transportation. And you take the trolley over to Constitution Avenue in Bristol, which is sort of just south of where the Prudence Ferry is. And you would come ashore there, get on the train there, and take that up to Providence. So that was probably a pretty long day trip up and back. You can see in this picture the Bristol Ferry light, though, over on the Bristol side right there. And of course, this went through many iterations and many floods and problems. It looks like they just had one. This was the freight station there. And some of us can remember when there was a really neat restaurant there, owned by Charlie Crouch. And you have the pogie boat going by also. There was, and I have a picture of this, I didn't put it in the slideshow, but there was what was called the Narragansett Oil and Guano Works. And it was in Common Fence Point. And it was a pretty big industrial operation. And they brought in various types of fish and other things and made it into fertilizer. It was a big operation there by the Church Brothers from Tiverton. There were 7 Church Brothers. That's another story. But anyway, you can see Mount Hope in the background in Bristol. And then we had the Bristol Ferry Inn. A very impressive building. Again, here's the wharf is right down here. This is on the wharf, looking back. And the Bristol Ferry Inn was quite a, and there was a Bristol Ferry Inn that goes back to probably, not this building, but probably about 1640, when the first ferries were used. And the ferries across Bristol Ferry to Bristol were rowboats, sailboats, and believe it or not, a horse-powered boat. A 2-horse-powered ship. 2 horses walked the treadmill, and the treadmill turned the paddle, and they took that across. That was in the 1840s. A 2-horsepower ferry. And then, of course, later, steam-powered. There were 2 major steam-powered ferries that went across, the Sagamore and the Bristol. Again, later on, toward the end of the 19th century.
Sagamore is the Cape God. Sagamore is the Cape God?
Well, that's the name of the ship.
Oh.
I don't know if where the name came from.
So it won't have a wife or horse.
We had schools in Portsmouth, again, 1-room schoolhouses, and this is Bristol Ferry School. This is, wait a minute. This is, yeah, Bristol Ferry School, which was on Boyd's Lane. And Miss Tortolet's class. Again, this picture is from 1913. Everybody got all dressed up for the picture. They actually integrated the boys and girls, although most of the 1-room schoolhouses had separate doors, separate cloakrooms, even though they were 1-room schoolhouses. We have 1-room schoolhouses all over town. There's nothing left of them now, except on Brayman's Lane. Steve Schaub's house was a 1-room schoolhouse. He's added on to it a lot, but that's about the only thing left. For a while, there was one on. The town used it for public works on the name of the street, across from the bank up here. But anyway, so there were remains of them. They all pretty much went out of business around 1946 or so, when they built things like the Anthony School over here. I don't have a picture, by the way, of the Quaker Hill School over here, because that wasn't built until 1914. That was a 1-room school, too.
And there's one on Prudence Island, too, I believe.
Oh yeah, still there, still used.
That's what I was thinking of.
Then we go to the coal mines. The road on the front right-hand corner here is Willow Lane. It wasn't called Willow Lane then, though. It was called Coal Mine Lane. It went down to the coal mine, and you can see the breaker of the south shaft of the coal mine on the right-hand side of this picture. A pretty big operation. The coal mine was there from off and on, from 1809 to 1913. And it probably was inoperative as much as it was operative. But it was a pretty big operation. These houses that were being built, and it's kind of interesting to see from one end to the other sort of how they constructed them, especially the roofs of them. They're on Depot Lane. There are about 2 of them, I think, that are still there. A couple others have been moved further east. But that was the patch. My mother grew up in the patch in western Pennsylvania. My grandfather was a coal miner. And so it's very typical of the patch kind of houses. And they probably were multi-family as well. But you can see the breaker, and the breaker was just about on the location of the Carnegie Abbey Tower, okay, or the Kaiser Tower for those of you who remember that one. That was the south shaft. The north shaft was up off Baker Road, further toward to the north. That's another lecture on the coal mines. We'll get to that. Okay, and this is a close-up of the south shaft. It was a big operation for some time. The big problem with the coal mines, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but the coal was anthracite. And the coal bed goes from Narragansett to Mansfield, Massachusetts. Under the bay, and in Portsmouth we had coal mines, we had mine shafts under the bay, 1,200 feet down. And they were always, they had to have pumps running all the time, pump the water out. And when it went out of business for a while, the mines just filled up. And then they would start again. But the whole area of the coal mine was a community of its own, along the area of Willow Lane and down in that area. It was a pretty big operation when it worked. But the problem with anthracite coal is that it is difficult to ignite, and then when it burns very hot. So if you tried to use it in your home furnace, it probably, and this did happen on occasion, it melted the furnace. It was too hot. They tried it in commercial enterprises, and it was better for commercial enterprises. But it never was tremendously successful. This area, and some of you may or may not know, this area is called Arnold's Point, down in that where the coal mine was, where the Carnegie Abbey community is there. I was giving a lecture down there one time, and one of the fellows said, I think you're right about the fact that there's a lot of coal on the surface down here. Because he said, I tried to grow my tomatoes, and he said I had to bring in about 6 loads of topsoil to be able to do it. That's all graphite on the top. Anyway, that's what the coal mine looked like. And this is really an interesting picture. This is again from Willow Lane, looking up the hill. Some of you might remember that this windmill which is now Prescott Farm, was at the top of Lehigh Hill, right by the scenic overlook there. And so this is looking up that hill. And in the foreground, being built, were coal mine houses, coal mine condominiums, I should say, apartments. And they were all brick. And nothing's left of that at all. And this is in the middle of a Carnegie Abbey golf course right now. Again, the scenic overlook is right about here, looking over the hill. And but those buildings were kind of interesting. I have a couple other pictures of those. They were interesting. That's where the coal miners lived. Also, next to the coal mines, north of the Carnegie Abbey Tower, was the copper works, the Taunton Copper Works. And the Taunton Copper Works, this is the ruins of it, again taken in Dubois' time. But the Copper Works was, it functioned from 1867 about until 1883. And what they did was to import copper. They had wharves there. They would bring copper there from Brazil and elsewhere, and they would smelt it into copper itself. I went down there one time when they were getting ready to build the Carnegie Abbey stuff with an archaeologist. And we found all kinds of little marbles laying around down there. And if you look closely at those marbles, they had copper inside them. And that was slag, copper slag. And from what I've heard in the 1950s, and that period, there were mountains of this stuff down there. It got pretty beat up. It certainly been cleaned up a lot, but it was a mess when we were down there, which again was before they started building all this. But this is the ruins of the copper mine, copper works rather, and it was part of a copper works in Taunton. I've done research in Taunton and found the link there. They expanded from Taunton and came down here for this. And it's kind of a really neat picture with the kids standing there too, seeing their reflections in the water. Okay. Next, we go a little further to the north, south rather, and we find Boyd's Windmill. Boyd's Windmill, again, most of us remember when the hub of it was sitting there on Mill Lane. And it was unusual unusual because it had 8 vanes. As far as I know, it's the only one around anywhere that had 8 vanes. We had windmills all over the place. In 1883, we had, I think it was 8 of them in town. Mostly used for grinding grain, especially corn, but other grain as well. And the Boyd mill was used for that. The Boyd mill was taken apart and moved to Middletown. It's in Paradise Valley Park now, off Prospect Avenue, off Paradise Avenue, and it's been restored. There is a restorer, one of them around. His name's Andy Schrake, and he's a De La Salle graduate, but he's the windmill man. He was out the Cape and has done a couple jobs out there. He did a lot of work on the mill at Prescott Farm, and also helped really put this one together for the Middletown Historical Society. But it was 8-vane windmill, and it was run by Benjamin Franklin Cornell Boyd until it ceased operation in 1946. It had been electrified up to that time. And as I understand it, the Newport Restoration Foundation, which owns the one at Prescott Farm, which is not this one, but a different one, has plans to put the sails on and get it going. I have a photograph I took of it going in, I think it was probably about 1979 or so. And it's really an interesting experience to see one of these things going. They do run the one in Middletown a couple times a year as well. VFC Boyd was an interesting character, though, in Portsmouth's history.
Oh, boy.
Then we have at Headley Station, in the Portsmouth camp, down the hill. A lot of people say this is a Quaker meeting place, but it wasn't. It really was more of an evangelical place. It's been there since 1891. I think that's what the sign is when they put it up in the summertime. And the trolley station is still seen because you have the Newport Electric, or I guess it's National Grid, lines go through there still. And you can see where the power lines go, and that's where the trolley was. The trolley followed those power lines. Interestingly about this photograph, though, in this postcard, is that there's an advertisement on the trolley for the camp meeting. Camp meeting today, right here.
Where's that located now?
It's up down the bottom of the hill on Headley Street, okay, just before you get to Long Meadow, right at the end of the Friends meeting, the evangelical meeting house. Again, and the trolley stations were pretty unique. A lot of gingerbread on this. You can see a little bit on this one. I have other pictures that show them better, but they really spend a lot of energy making really nice trolley stations. This is one of my favorites. This is and I think it was a posed picture. I think it was probably a promotional photograph for the trolley line. This is at the top of Retinyl Hill. Okay. And I always wondered what happened. I'd read that the trolleys went inland a couple places off the main roads, and I always wondered where this happened at the top of Retinyl Hill until I drove by about 100 times and looked over and saw the power lines going off the side down into Green Valley Country Club. And you can still see that. The power lines still go that way. And that's where the trolley went. The reason it went off the main road was that Retinyl Hill was too steep. Retinyl Hill and the other hill up the other side was too steep for the trolley. They couldn't get traction, and so they went inland. They went inland a couple places. That was one. That one came out on Union Street, and then they came back onto the main road. They also went inland at the bottom of the hill here. They couldn't make Turkey Hill. And so they went inland right by the camp meeting, and then went down over the hill to where that big power station is on Freeborn Street. Okay? Then they took a right down Freeborn, and then took a left onto Bristol Ferry Road. Turnpike Avenue, Bristol Ferry Road. And went down to the wharf down at the end. But it's kind of interesting. This is an open car trolley. We hope it was in the summertime. And what's interesting about this picture, too, is the fact that you've got the horse and buggy and the woman, I hope, probably, with a parasol, fighting off the dust of the main road. Again, you can see the trolley line. Things are pretty stark as far as the poles go. But you can see the trolley line curves around and goes down the hill. And you can still see that. It's kind of interesting to see if you dare take your eyes off the road when you're going down Retinyl Hill. Take a look at that.
It looked like it just finished raining. Look at it.
It's like water. Yeah, it looks like water on the right-hand side.
Looked like it just finished Street.
Now this picture was taken looking south. The next picture was taken a little bit earlier looking north, same area. Okay. Now here you see Boy's Windmill in the background. You see the trolley line. This is what the West Main Road looked like. Look at they're biking and walking along the West Main Road. It's kind of interesting. And again, the same trolley, same number on it, and coming down. Again, this is the photographer standing at the top of Raytheon Hill looking back north. And that's a beautiful picture composition-wise. That's not a Dubois postcard there. It's a great picture. Next we have the Cornell Farm, the Valley Inn of Newport. Yeah, still there. Beautiful farmhouse. And been built around a little bit. And the next and last slide is Prescott Farm. Again, with Prescott Farm, all we have is the main farmhouse. The house was built in 1740. I think many of you know the story of Prescott Farm. I always wonder why it's called Prescott, because British General Prescott was captured there by Colonel Barton and a bunch of Americans, a bunch of natives here, and carried off in the middle of the night. It was the Overing house. Mr. Overing owned the house. There's a great mystery as to why General Prescott was there. He was the commander of the British troops in Newport. And for whatever reason, he was out there. And on July 17th, the night of July 17th, 1777, he was captured by a group of Americans who came on shore in Narragansett Bay, went up there, captured him, and took him off. And he was later exchanged for an American general who had been captured also. And interestingly, that's July 77. In August of 78, at the time of the siege of Newport and the Battle of Rhode Island, General Prescott was back in Newport in command of British troops at that time. Kind of an interesting turnaround. So, that in brief is a look at the town. I have somewhere in the city about 1,000 old pictures of Portsmouth, and it was not easy selecting 38 or 9 for this. I think that the only reason to collect this stuff, and I've been collecting it since I started writing books in 1976, is to show it. And this 375th has given me a real opportunity to be able to show these things. I think that's really important and really a great part of what we're trying to do. So, and I will expand these things, again, 7 more lectures, and the next one is on transportation. And the shortcut for that is trolleys, railroads, steamboats, and ferries. And we'll talk about all those. It's really a lot of fun doing all this stuff. I have great enjoyment, and I have to say that I have a great support system, my wife, who has helped put all this together and kept it flowing for me. I can find the pictures,